Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. It's nice to be back at Prego Expo, and I hope you're having hopefully a relaxing week, although the world does seem a little bit upside down. Super nice to be here. My name's Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson. I'm a general pediatrician. I'm the mom to two boys who are now super big. My youngest is about to turn 12. And I'm here to really just chat about what we know today about kind of smarter and more informed ways to feed babies. I kind of like to call it like how to feed a baby in 2020 or 2021. And I'll just go through a number of those tips. And, my colleague, Stacy Eulacia, will be in the comments kind of answering any questions that you can put forward. And I'll try to answer some questions at the end as well. So first and foremost, I just want to say congratulations. You've got a new baby or you're expecting one, and what a wild time to have a baby. But I'll tell you, I think any time is wild having a baby. And, of anything, I'll tell you, I think feeding can be some of the most stressful things that we do with our children, but some of the most kind of spiritually rewarding. I really think that, being a practicing general pediatrician for 12 years and being a mom, I always feel like we feel kind of most at peace when our babies are sleeping and they're calm and they're really comfortable, and they're kind of in our eyesight, where you can see them, but everything's going well, or when we're nourishing them, when we're feeding them and they're enjoying eating, or they're sated, or they're really happy. I think there is just something very ingrained in who we are. And so, as you launch in your feeding journey with your baby, it's going to be a time of great adventure and great joy, and probably a little bit of frustration too. And I'll tell you, everybody around you is going to try to tell you what to do. That's one of the hardest parts of parenthood, from the mother-in-law to the neighbor, to your partner, to books, to online things coming at you in Facebook or on Instagram. We're kind of inundated with advice. And if anything, kind of trusting your instincts is really important. And yet there are certain things that I think science shows us today that you can think on. So, first and foremost, you're going to get bombarded with messages on breastfeeding. And I'm a big supporter of breastfeeding without question. I'm sure you've heard, there are really lovely and profound benefits to breastfeeding on mom's health, on even like weight loss and postpartum recovery, but just the bonding that happens with your baby. And of course, the nutrition effects that come from breast milk. But I have to be very clear with you. I'm a mom who wasn't able to give my babies 100% breast milk. Most moms who want to breastfeed over 90% have no trouble. Right in the beginning, if it's your first baby, it can be a hard transition, but most moms really do achieve their goals in breastfeeding. But formula is really good for babies too. So, it is of course manufactured to be as much like breast milk as possible, but it can be a really important way for you to provide nourishment to your baby if you're not able to provide as much breast milk or you don't choose to do that. No question that in a time, particularly in cough and cold and what we call flu season this time of year, and, amid the pandemic too, there are benefits of immune protection that come from breastfeeding that you just can't replicate in formula. Outside of that, the differences really do tend to fall away. So know that any amount of breast milk from the very beginning, that kind of gold colostrum that you provide to any weeks or months of breastfeeding, do provide a bit of immune protection, but it's not fail-proof, and there's nothing perfectly magic about it. So I just want you to feel confidence with whatever you choose. A lot of parents really work hard in the very beginning to prioritize breastfeeding. And I think it's really well worth your while to really, spend those first 10, 14, 20 days with the supportive people around you. Let people help you, let people keep you hydrated and rest, recognizing that that's a ton of work. But, no question that breastfeeding a baby is a full-time job. We can spend anywhere from 7 to 8 hours a day in early life breastfeeding our babies. So I think it's, you typically need a ton of support. And I always say, like, do anything you can. I remember when I went back to work right at 4 months with my babies. And, I would bring photographs when I was up in the pump room, and, we had music in the pump room. My first pregnancy, I had to pump in my car at times. It's not perfectly ideal for any of us, but you can do it. And however you design it, whatever's important to you is going to be most important for what you fight for. But let people help you in that kind of fight to kind of carve out space and time. But, so your baby in those first few months is certainly on a liquid diet. We recommend at the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, that we supplement with 400 international units or a kind of dropper full of vitamin D if you're formula fed or breastfed. We know that vitamin D has immune function support. There are some long-standing risk factors related to bone health or even immune health around the development of insulin-dependent diabetes. But most importantly, the reason that we really want you to give vitamin D early in life is that breast milk, you don't tend to produce enough vitamin D. And particularly if you live in a low light climate, you won't get enough vitamin D as a breastfeeding mom to pass it along to babies. So we recommend that for all babies. And then your baby will start to show you some signs of readiness. And that is to kind of move forward to the beginning of your journey on, pureed baby foods or even baby-led weaning. And babies really tend to drive this train. And I like that. I mean, I don't think you on the 4-month birthday need to do anything. I think you need to look at your baby and how your baby's interacting with you when you eat. If you're having family meals, babies will often kind of lick the air. They'll sniff, they'll watch, they'll, kind of eye you. So they'll see you, if you've got a thing of soup and you're trying to feed yourself, your baby will kind of like watch your spoon and follow you. That's a sign of like emotionally, right? They're communicating to you like, that smells good. Like, what is that? And that's a really lovely sign. And then your baby also has to show you some developmental signs of readiness. And you've probably heard of like fine motor control and gross motor. And when it comes to feeding, there's a little bit of both. I mean, babies, as they're starting to kind of show readiness for feeding, you want to make sure that they've got really good head control. And the reason for that is just a choking risk. When you get food to the very back of your mouth, something called the involuntary swallow reflex happens. That means when you take spit or food or liquids, you move it from the front of your mouth with your tongue and your teeth, you move it to the back, and then an involuntary swallow reflex takes over. And you want to be able to make sure that, of course, you can keep your head up. If you don't, that involuntary swallow reflex can lead to choking. So one of the signs for readiness is your baby keeping their head up. The other one is that if you're sitting your baby in like a little bamba chair or they're sitting on your lap, that they basically need to be able to do what I'm doing right now, kind of, keeping their trunk and their center really upright. That also shows you just kind of a developmental readiness in that way. And once your baby's doing that, the next thing is really, what do they do when you interact with them with food? So if you decide to do some pureed food, and again, this is the first time telling you, you get to decide what your first food is. There is no magic to whatever your first food is. Avocado, peaches, cereal of any kind. Frankly, you could ground up turkey meat into a beautiful puree if that's what you wanted your first your baby's first feed to be on Thanksgiving Day. I mean, it's really up to you. There's no rhyme or reason to that. And you want in the beginning for your babies to get exposed to all different foods. The flavor preferences we think are most strongly developed between 4 and 7 months of age. So your babies, are learning to like bitter. They're learning to like sweet. They're learning all the different kind of textures. So the other sign of readiness is you maybe wait for your baby to open their mouth, you put a little spoon in, and then that they don't just kind of thrust the food out. If they thrust it all out right in the beginning, it might just be they're like overwhelmed with the flavor. It might be they're overwhelmed with the texture, but sometimes if it's a little bit too early, if they're kind of not ready to negotiate that little piece of food and get it all the way to the back, they'll just tongue thrust every time. And then you just wait a couple of days and you try again. And then once your baby doesn't do that, once your baby learns to take whatever you put on the tip of their tongue or right in the center of their mouth, and then they move it to the back and they swallow, that's when that's another sign of readiness. And then it's just whatever you like. I mean, babies have 2 to 3 times the amount of taste buds that you and I do. So everything is a taste explosion. You never need to salt food. You never need to add any sugar to food. And you simply never need to add any spices. I mean, I think some super organized, amazing moms who make all their food. I never made a homemade baby food. I was a full-time working mom and I could not pull that off. I mashed up all sorts of stuff. I tried to buy, organic foods to support the organic industry. But again, depending on how you want to spend your money, there isn't any really known research that shows that organic food, for example, provides any health benefits. So it's really, taking foods from your own family's cultural traditions, taking foods from your refrigerator, involving and enjoying, those foods with your baby, but you really get to decide what's first. Soft fruits and vegetables are easy. But if anything we know in 2020 is that we don't want to just kind of have the food source of the baby food industry dictate what we eat, and that we really know we want babies to have as much food diversity early in life. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There's a study published by Dr. Karina Venter in the last year that finds each additional food, specifically when it comes to common food allergens, for example, that you add decreases the likelihood of your children developing things like eczema, hay fever, fever, or even food allergies. So there's an additive approach to, yeah, you've maybe heard you don't want to wait on things like peanut. You don't want to wait on things like egg. You don't want to wait on things even like fish or shellfish. But we want as much food diversity throughout our lifetimes as possible. But you'll set the stage for that really early. So you should just feel like you can do whatever you like and introduce. And pediatricians used to talk about going really slow, eating a food and waiting. And we now know that probably protracts. I mean, it probably causes families to take too long to get all the desired foods that we want into a baby's diet. So I'm saying don't wait more than like a new food every day. But in fact, you can introduce something at breakfast to your baby. And if your baby chooses to join you for some solid foods at dinner on the same day, there's no challenge in the morning with the food. You can do another one in the evening time. You know, lots of families like to do one food at a time, particularly with foods that are common allergens, things like peanuts or tree nuts, egg, wheat, soy. You know, those are the common kind of leading, and even dairy, the leading allergens that we know about. But more and more research from around the world is really showing that early, not just early introduction, but getting it in early, around 4 to 6 months. So right from the very beginning, getting, you know, peanut protein in the diet, getting cashew into the diet, getting fish or even shrimp into the diet can help the immune system learn as it comes through that tummy, that the immune system can say, oh yeah, I know this food. I'm not going to change. You know, babies are not typically thought to ever be born with allergic disease. That kind of living on the planet, we believe that allergies have started to dramatically increase here in the United States and around the world for multiple reasons. Number one, that we don't probably eat as diverse a diet as we used to 100 years ago. We believe that, we've overused antibiotics. So our, what's called the microbiome, all that good bacteria that lives on our skin and lives inside our tummies, has kind of changed. Vitamin D deficiency is thought to actually be a mediator in that. And then, also like this kind of diversity concept. So for example, if you have a puppy in your house or a dog and you're raising your baby, we know your children are less likely to develop allergies if raised in the environment with pets. And the reason is those pets just bring in fungus and parasites and bacteria and gunk from the yard. And all of that different diversity is just in your house, on the floor where your baby does tummy time and all over. And that's a good thing in some ways. You don't want to limit your baby's exposure as their immune system is developing. And we know that the number one risk factor for developing allergies is eczema. Eczema is a skin rash where the barrier of the skin is broken down a little bit. So you can get dry skin, it can get a little flaky, and then for some babies, it can get really, really itchy. And we know that that's likely the number one risk factor for developing food allergy because kids are then exposed to food particles through their skin. So if mom's making eggs and she's making a little omelet and then she picks up baby and baby's got a little open skin, baby's getting introduced to eggs through that broken down skin barrier. And what we know is that we want babies to get introduced to foods the way that the immune system designed it, through that tummy. So that's part of why that early feeding is really important. We want food to come into the tummy where 70% of your immune system is in your gastrointestinal tract, and have that body as it's growing up learn all about those different food proteins. So not just peanut, of course, and not just early, but keeping it in the diet all through the time when baby's going from kind of just the beginning of solid food introduction all the way into toddlerhood, when feeding patterns kind of change. We know that the studies that showed that early peanut introduction, for example, a trial called the LEAP trial, they evaluated babies as young as 4 months up to 11 months of age, and they followed them for 4 years eating peanut at least 3 times a week. And when they did that, 80% of those high-risk babies with eczema didn't develop food allergies when they were eating peanut at least 3 times a week. And so it isn't just kind of like getting it in early. It's you as a mom or you as a household member with anyone is making sure that you're constantly giving your baby all these different foods and they're getting exposed to them as they're growing up so that their body just is, kind of in the presence of all that food diversity that way. So, your number one thing is to enjoy feeding. I mean, I think, there's a really beautiful line from a pediatric nutritionist named Ellen Satter. And she always says there's this division of responsibility in feeding. You get to be forever. It doesn't matter if you're a baby, toddler, preschooler, school age, or even a teenager. Your job is to provide good, whole, fresh fruits and vegetables, all the different food groups, and tons of food diversity. And your baby or even your teenager's job is to choose what you provide and to eat it. And if you keep offering all that food diversity over time, you have the opportunity to make sure that your baby's growing up, their body is getting introduced and learning about all those food proteins. So don't go slow. Don't get scared about common food allergens. In fact, if babies have ever developed an allergy before first feeding of that food, if they have a reaction on first feeding, the most common reactions in infants are hives and vomiting. So it would be something that you would very easily be able to manage. If you ever got concerned that your baby had a reaction within minutes to 2 hours of feeding on a certain food, like hives, welts all over their face or lip swelling or immediate vomiting after feeding a certain food, and you fed it again, they did the same thing, then you would talk to your pediatrician. The good news is over 90% of kids don't develop food allergies, but we know we can probably contract down that 8% of kids with food allergies way down by making sure we feed differently. We know that food allergies have doubled in each of the last decades. And part of that is because pediatricians like me for 20 years have been saying, don't eat these foods early in life. So we now know, you're the first kind of mom brigade and mom generation where you're going to be feeding again, I think like our great grandmothers did, and opening up the pantry and opening up all the cabinets and enjoying your babies eating all those different foods. So get all sorts of different foods in early, make sure they're diverse, that, you're starting at 4 to 6 months, and then just make sure you stick with it. As you know, I'm the chief medical officer of Spoonful One, which is a convenient food product that puts 16 different foods that are kind of the common allergens out there and allows for parents to conveniently get all those different foods in their diet on a daily basis with mix-ins right in the beginning. So for 4 to 6 month olds, it can go into a bottle or into soft pureed food. And then we have puffs and crackers as kids grow up, so that moms and dads can be exploring all the different products in their cupboard, but they can also kind of rest easy that every day, you're getting all that food diversity and early in life. So with that, I think I'll stop and give you guys a little bit of time. I'm just going to check in and see if you've got some comments. Let me just see. I'm not the best at usually figuring out where these messages are. Let's see. Chat. I'm in the chat. I don't see too many different questions here. Let's see. Stacey, if you're there, draw me a text if there's anything you want me to go over. But ultimately, I think you can feel a great sense of freedom by kind of taking control really early, getting all these different foods in, keeping at it, and not being scared of these foods as your baby grows and develops. So thank you. I don't see any questions coming in. And it may be that I'm not in the right spot here, you guys. I'm in the chat. Here's a question. It says, how will you know which product your baby had a reaction to? Oh, yeah, that's a nice question. So whenever you have any combination foods, so that's, if you're feeding the goulash from your family or whatever it is that you've made that has multiple ingredients, and if a child were to have a reaction, right, typically, we in the healthcare field are really accustomed to dealing with that. So for example, if you fed, something that had multiple different ingredients, and you go in and you say, well, yeah, actually they tolerate eggs all the time. And yeah, she eats yogurt every day. She has no trouble with that. And oh yeah, she's had, peanut butter mixed in oatmeal since she was 4 months old. And you say, oh yeah, the one ingredient in there that's new today, right, is XYZ. And then you'd go about strategically testing for that. From a standpoint of Spoonful One as a product, it was designed based on research that was conducted by our founder, who runs the allergy and immunology section at Stanford University, who studied feeding about 450 babies, a mix of 10 different proteins at different levels. And Spoonful One was precisely measured to be a low amount of food, enough that the immune system sees it, but to be a low amount of food that it won't typically ever really be provoking to the immune system. So we've now distributed over about 1 million servings of Spoonful One. And we have seen a handful of kids who have already developed an allergy before they ate it for the first time. And we've navigated with a few families that relationship with their pediatric allergist to check. And a couple of different children, for example, have been able to discover a food allergy on feeding Spoonful One, or in some cases, multiple food allergies with that very small serving size. So you would just talk to your pediatrician. You'd kind of deduce what you thought was a kind of front runner of what that might be. And then you would go strategically about food allergy testing with an allergist at that way. So that's that. We've had a lot of experience with that. Better to go combination of foods or go one at a time? Yeah, great question. I mean, I think we medicalized, like pediatricians like me really medicalized feeding. I mean, we saw, I'm in my mid 40s, and I, was in school in the 70s and 80s, and we didn't have as many food allergies at that time. We've seen a doubling in each one of the last decades for food allergies, doubling. So, in the 70s, then you double the amount of allergies in the 80s, you double the amount of 90s, you double into the 2000s. So it has risen up so dramatically. We think because of, those things I was telling you about, diversity and even detergents that break down our skin and probably change the way that we're exposed to foods. And so we told people to hold off. We told people to go slow. We told people to do one at a time. And I think we ultimately kind of medicalized what food is. We started having new moms and dads start feeding their kids, thinking about feeding a child as to if you're kind of determining that they're not allergic. And I theoretically don't believe that anymore. I mean, I think you can eat lots of different foods at the same time. If you introduce, for example, I mean, if you're concerned about it or you've got worries and you want to do, a peanut on its own or dairy on its own for the very first time, but once you've done it, a couple times, then you can kind of mix things together. So I like the idea of mixing things together from a flavor standpoint, from a convenience standpoint, that if you make yourself an omelet in the morning and you've got your 8-month-old there and they're just starting to do some self-feeding and you've got, little peppers in it, or you've got, cheese in it, or a little bit of ham. Like I want you to give all of that to your baby. We want you to enjoy the kind of cultures and the foods that you love. And I think this concept of like one at a time and watching and this fear-based is a very allergy focused approach. Whereas I think pediatricians, we see like, we want you to feel freedom. And we know the safest time to introduce these foods is at 4 to 5 and 6 months, because children, number one, most likely haven't ever developed an allergy, that you will likely protect against the development of allergies by getting those common foods in early and often. It's part of why we think kids who are even a little sensitive can avoid the development of allergies, those kids that are high risk with eczema, for example. So my recommendation is to not focus so much on, one at a time and going slow, but to really like let go of that and to just enjoy the food. I think you're going to get more food diversity in. I think you're going to decrease the likelihood your child develops an allergy, and you're going to feel freedom that way. And, this new kind of product category of convenience where you could, there are a couple of products on the market, for example, that just have peanut or powder, or just have tree nut powder, or just have milk and egg and peanut. And you could use those. I mean, the Spoonful One philosophy was get all these different foods in so that they can be there together, like a diverse microbiome, a diverse set of foods in that way, so that moms and dads can really feel they're covering all of the foods that are the most common allergens, not just peanut, not just egg and peanut, not just egg, milk and peanut, but all the tree nuts, looking and thinking about soy as well, and wheat. And the number one rising allergy here in the United States is sesame. And you can feed your baby that from the cupboard with things like tahini and other lovely snacks that include sesame. That's great, but you can also make sure on a daily basis, by using some of these categories. So anything to eat during pregnancy, protect baby. So that's a lovely question. So if you're still pregnant, number one thing we know is we don't want you to restrict your diet during pregnancy. The data is a little bit wishy-washy in, is there an exact diet that can help protect a child? There isn't, but we do know very clearly that restriction of your diet, meaning you avoiding things, is not in your child's best interest. So you're probably avoiding certain things like, blue vein cheeses and cold cuts from the counter, right? And sushi. But at the same time, if you're eating small amounts of fish every week, we want you to do that, or even shellfish every week. We want you to have nuts and nut butters into your diet if you're not allergic yourself. And particularly if food allergies run in the family, again, the number one risk factor for developing a food allergy is eczema. But a family history of food allergies will also increase the likelihood of a child developing that. So if that runs in your family and on your partner's side or biologically, then a good thing to do is just to eat a really diverse diet during pregnancy and make sure you're nourishing yourself that well. Well, thank you so much for having me here. Enjoy this amazing time as you get ready to have your babies or enjoying your newborns during this time. And the feeding journey is really spiritual and remarkable and beautiful. And I hope this session helps. So have a great day and take care.